Hello and welcome to this next edition of Words with Friends. And this is where I talk about a word with a friend. It really is that kind of simple. And today's word of choice is the word creative. And to help me understand more about the word creative, help you understand more about the word creative, we have somebody who knows a lot about the word creative. So today we have Todd Henry. Hey, Todd, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Phil. It's great to be here.
And I say Todd knows a little bit about being creative. I mean, he did everything from write the book about the accidental creative to a number of pieces in between, including write a book called Die Empty, a book called Louder Than Words. He is a friend, and most recently, he wrote a book called Herding Tigers, which is about leading and managing creative people. So I think you might know a little bit about the word creative, Todd. Would that be fair?
I think that's fair. Yeah, okay. Although I feel like you're going to put me on the spot. But I feel like that's fair.
I might put you on the spot. I can't promise to not do that. But hit me with this. Like, what does it mean to be creative, right? It's a word that's thrown around. What does that mean?
Yeah, there are a number of ways we could define creativity. I like to define creativity as problem solving, right? I think we tend to conflate creativity and art. I think people tend to think like, oh, I'm not creative. And I hear this all the time in the marketplace. Oh, I'm not creative. Right. And what they really mean is, oh, I don't design, I don't make artwork, I'm not a musician, and so they think, well, I'm not creative. And I think what's happening there is they're conflating creativity, which is problem solving at the heart of it, with art. So an artist, a designer, a writer, a musician solves a problem by creating a piece of art. That's what they do. That is a creative act, but it's an artistic creative act. But an entrepreneur, an accountant, a sales manager has to be creative by solving a problem. Like, for example, oh, this customer has an issue. We have to figure out some system to help deliver value for this issue our customer's experiencing. That's a creative act. We often don't believe that, I think, as humans who are sort of trained to think that creativity is the domain of these other special people over here, the creatives, as we call them, right? But the reality is we all have to be creative as a function of our job because we have to solve problems, which means, by the way, that we're all prone to all of the same issues, dynamics, struggles, insecurities that a lot of the typical creatives are prone to. It's just that we maybe haven't been given the tools to be able to deal with that.
Okay. Now, I was in a conversation the other day listening to a parent talking about their two kids. And when they were talking about their two kids, one of the things they said is like, oh, he's the creative one. And she's the go-getter.
Yeah.
And that to me throwed out this kind of weird set of thoughts where I went spiraling around, like, what does it mean to be creative? And can you have one without the other? It seemed unusual to me that particularly, we like to label people that you can't be creative without being ambitious and driven. And if you're ambitious and driven, you can't necessarily be creative. What's your thoughts in and around that?
I think that is an unfortunate stereotype that we have about creative people. I think, there are a number of myths. Creative people, by the way, when I say creative people, I'm referring to anybody who has to go to work and solve problems every day, right? But I think that there are some myths that we have about what it means to be a creative person. Creative people are undisciplined. If you are a driven, disciplined person, then you're not a creative, because creatives are people who sit around in their loft all day, dreaming up possibilities for, whatever. And that is just unfortunate and untrue. I mean, many of the extremely brilliant, creative, innovative, wildly imaginative people I know are also driven. They pair that with an ambition, an understanding of how to get things done. They're maybe not always completely skilled in operations, but they understand how to solve that problem and find people they can pair that ambition with in order to accomplish what they want. So I think there are a number of myths that we hold about what it means to be a creative, and it grieves me to hear that experience of the parents sort of laying that on their children, because that those narratives then begin to define how we see ourselves in the world. Oh, okay, well, the domain of creativity just isn't for me because I have ambition. What does that mean? I don't, it doesn't really seem to resonate at all with anything that I've experienced. Now, I think also on the flip side, those maybe some of those narratives that we feed to our children or we feed people in school also affect the people who tend to skew toward being more imaginative, being able to make those, sort of non-intuitive, loose connections, which is often, when we say that's a highly creative thing, what we really mean is, oh, it's familiar, but it's non-intuitive. It's a connection that I wouldn't have made. And that's an intuitive leap that maybe you can get to that I can't quite get to. And that can be because of your domain expertise. That can be because of a special ability that you have to be able to think systemically in a way that I can't think systemically. So that's always a possibility. But I think what we do when we layer those things onto people who make those non-intuitive leaps is we tell them, like, well, you don't have to be disciplined because you're a creative type, right? Just go do your thing. Just go sit in your room. And that's unfortunate as well, because as you and I both know, in order to get anything done in this world, you have to have some operational understanding. What does it take to execute your idea? And a lot of people, unfortunately, have the ability to generate ideas, but they don't really necessarily have the ambition, drive, or skill to be able to execute it, which is unfortunate. Yeah.
Okay. But in the world of business, one thing that happens a lot is people say things like, I'm going to put that across to the creative department, right? So like this other department to be able to do all things creative, and it becomes real easy to abdicate any personal responsibility to anything that may well be creative. And the result of which often, through my experience, is we give bad briefs to other people in order to be able to do things, or zero brief whatsoever through the abdication of the responsibility of creativity. What's your experience around that?
Yeah, that's an unfortunate dynamic as well. I think abdication is a great word, because what we're doing basically is we're passing off responsibility for thinking strategically about the outcome to the people that we deem as creative. The reality is creative people need rails. They need, we tend to have, there's a myth about creative people that they just want complete freedom. Don't fence me in, just give me wide open spaces. That's not helpful to the creative process. Orson Welles, the great filmmaker, said that the absence of limitation is the enemy of art.
Okay.
We need to have some bounding arc, some limitation to our creative process to enable us to be able to channel our focus, our assets, our time, and our energy into the work that we're doing. Without that limitation, without that bounding arc, then a lot of people will just wash out on the plane because they don't know where to spend their finite energy. So when a manager says, well, let's just let the creatives handle that, and there's not really a specific brief, there's no real strategic direction, it's just figure it out, not helpful at all. So we need to understand that the creative process is a give and take between strategy and ideation, right? And then obviously execution on the back end of it. But you need to have that sort of bounded arc of a clear strategy, clear expectations in order to set creative people up for the work that they're doing. And I call this, the importance of stability. There are really kind of two things that creative people, I think, need more than anything else in order to thrive. The first is stability, and stability is that bounding arc. It's clear expectations, clear strategy, a clear understanding of where should I spend my finite resources. That's critically important for creative people to be able to thrive.
So how do I take that kind of concept, which I believe to be true, and apply it to me? Like, we have problems that exist in my business, problems that exist in my life. How do I create those boundaries or frameworks to be able to perhaps encourage more of that problem solving thought?
Yeah, well, I think if we define creativity as problem solving, which we have, I believe, then I think the first step is to define the problem. I think sometimes we attack projects. We attack concepts, but we aren't attacking specific problems. So the very first step to generating ideas around anything that you're trying to solve is to step back and to ask, what are we really trying to do here? What is the real problem that we're solving? Not what's the project that we're attacking, not what is the outcome that we hope to achieve right at the end, but like, what is the problem that's standing between us and that outcome? And the more specific you can get in defining that problem, and the closer to the metal you can get in defining the problem, the easier it's going to be for you to begin to make traction on solving that problem. And I've encountered this, I'm sure you have as well, Phil. I've worked with organizations and they'll tell me, we're just stuck. We're stuck in a rut. We can't figure out how to get out of this rut. And when I really dig into it, I find out that there are 5 people on the team, and every person on the team is trying to solve a different problem because they've never stepped back to talk about what are we really trying to do here. There's an assumptive rut that we often find ourselves in. Because of domain expertise, we've been doing this for a while. We all assume everyone else is on the same page because we've been working together for so long. We're using common language. So because we're using common language, we think that those words mean the same thing. I mean, this is your area of expertise, right? We can use the same word and mean very different things. by that word. And so we have to make certain that we are defining our terms the same way, that we're defining the problems the same way, and that we're all on the same page, and we're all moving in the same direction. That begins by defining the problem specifically and precisely so that we can begin to attack the same thing together.
Okay. So it starts with defining the problem, and then outside of that, once I've got clarity and definition of exactly what it is that is the mission critical thing that we're working on, I guess that we then need to apply some boundaries to that in some way, right? Is to be able to say, how do we ring fence this in the way? Is that right in what I'm saying there? Are we talking about the fact that we might need to put either time-bound constraints on it or financial constraints on it, and say that we want the best we can do to solve this problem in this time scale for this level of expense?
That's right. That's exactly right. And I think at the heart of it, what you're saying there is we need to answer the question, how will we know when we're finished? How will we know when we've accomplished? How will we know when we solve this problem, right? And there are financial constraints, there are time constraints, there are client expectation constraints. There's typically some kind of creative brief or some sort of strategy brief that we're trying to satisfy. All of those things provide the boundaries within which we must work. So how will we know when we've succeeded? Again, and I'm sure you've experienced this as I have, we don't answer that question sometimes. And so what happens? Well, we keep working until we run out of time, until we run out of money. Project bleeds into project. We could have been finished 3 weeks ago, but it doesn't matter because we still have 3 weeks left. So we're going to keep working and tweaking and perfecting to get that final 0.02% out of the project. Well, that's not very helpful. And it actually leads to an unhealthy culture of overwork and what Scott Belsky calls insecurity work, right? We're working towards something, not because we really think we're making progress, but because we're afraid that we're not doing enough to satisfy the objective. And so defining the problem and defining how we will know when we've accomplished what we set out to accomplish is really important. So those provide kind of the beginning and end boundary marks for the work. And then the strategy brief, creative brief, client objectives, all of those things, organizational objectives, those provide sort of the lateral bounding arc for the work that we're doing.
Help me understand this in the simplest of layman's of terms. Let's say that the creative project in hand is a child in your life needs a birthday cake.
Right.
That's the creative project. How do we work through that? What would we be applying to bring some Todd Henry brilliance to be creative around the deliverables on that project? What might that look like?
Well, you have time constraints, right? Do I physically have the time to make this cake myself? While that might seem like a more personal approach, right? Maybe my child will appreciate that if I make it myself because it's something I did for them. I have time constraints. I have a job. I have other obligations. So can I physically do that? That's a time constraint I have. When is the birthday party? Is it in 3 weeks, or is it tonight at 5 p.m. at the end of the workday, right? That's another time. So we have to consider time constraints. There are resource constraints. How much can I afford to spend in order to accomplish this project? And then there are expectations that we have. So in my dream world of worlds, what would be the thing that would absolutely blow my child's mind? Maybe it's, my children are older, so I have no idea what kids like these days, right? But maybe it's like building a multi-tiered giant room-size cake out of which pops their favorite television character, right? Okay, well, that would be amazing, but we have some resource constraints. We can't afford to do that. So what can we afford to do? So what is and this is a phrase that sort of comes up a lot in the world of industrial design that sort of became a design ethic over the course of the 20th century, is this idea of most advanced yet acceptable, right? So what is the idea that is going to be the most advanced idea that we can come up with, but also is acceptable because it's not so far out of bounds that it's going to stretch us resource-wise or expectations-wise. And so we have to. I recently listened to a book called The Hitmakers, which is about what is it that causes things to catch on in the world of scarce attention. And in the book, the author was arguing that there's a tremendous amount of research that shows that we tend to think people love brilliant, novel ideas, things that are wild and creative, but that's not actually reality. Reality is that we like things that tend to be just novel enough that they push us and stretch us, but still familiar enough that we have some grid for them, right? And so I would say to get back to the birthday cake. Sorry, this is my non sequitur, special here. But
I'm making it tough for you to talk about birthday cakes.
To get back to the birthday cake, I think that we're looking for something that will surprise our child, that will make them feel special and valued. That's our objective, and yet fits within the bounds of our constraints, whether that be time, resources, focus, all of those things. And so I think that's sort of the bounding arc of the project.
Okay. Now back to this whole point of abdication again is, I guess one of the things that I see happen a lot that I'd like your take on is the involving of other people towards the creation of the creative outcome before you're ready to be able to involve other people. So what happens is we start having other people's ideas talk into something before you've got clarity of the brief. I see it with logo design, slide design, website design. I see it with so many different areas where people are looking to outsource something to somebody else. It's like, hey, I want a new video for my business, but they haven't gone through any of the ability to be able to create a proper creative brief first. What would be your advice to people before engaging with somebody to be able to lead forward with a creative project?
Yeah, so you have to step back. At that point, you have to hit the brakes very quickly and say, I know that's what you're asking for. That's why you're coming to us, is because you want a video, because you saw someone else's video and you thought, we need one of those. But hold on, that was an execution designed to solve a very specific problem for that business. Maybe there's some other execution that will be not only more effective for you, but might even be more cost effective for you, right? So let's step back and let's talk about, what are you really trying to do? I'm trying to get new clients. I'm trying to raise awareness for a project. I'm just trying to build my brand in some capacity. Great, wonderful. Let's talk about all of the potential executions that we could do in order to help you accomplish the specific strategy or the specific outcome that you're trying to achieve, the problem that you're trying to solve, rather than, oh, okay, great, let's talk about what kind of video you want, which is, there are many companies who are more than willing to just take your money and make a video and not even ask you questions. But I don't think that's really serving the client. I think if you want to serve the client, you have to be brave enough, because it's brave to do that, to tell a client, listen, I would love to take your money, but I'm not going to. First, I'm going to step back and ask you, what are you trying to do? And I know that I'm certain that you do this with the work that you do. I do this very often with clients who approach me. I have told them, I have significant projects, tremendous amount of revenue. And I'll say, hold on, I'm not 100% sure I'm the right person for you. Let's talk about this first. What are you trying to accomplish? And there are many times when I've said, actually, that's not really in my sweet spot. That's not really what I do. But I'm happy to make referrals to other people who can solve that problem for you. And as you know, often people will say, well, hold on. Let's talk about what you do and how can you solve it? You know what I mean? Like when you do that, they tend to say, well, no, we want to work with you. But I think you have to be willing to step back and say, hold on, let's not begin with execution, because beginning with execution will lead you astray. You have to begin with, what is the problem we're solving? Again, we have to define the problem specifically, and then we can begin to think execution toward outcome. But we have to begin with defining that problem, making sure that we're not starting with execution.
Let's try and simplify this for people listening in right now. One of the things that I see a lot, particularly with creative resource now being available, largely to small business owners through things like freelance networks, like People Per Hour and Upwork, and this kind of ability to get straight towards a creative practitioner, so to speak, right, is what happens now is that consultation process that would have often happened that if you engage with an agency, for example, to be able to deliver on a project as a business, you would get the answers to these questions, perhaps doesn't happen so much so. I was speaking to a mutual friend of ours that I won't mention by name yesterday that shows me an infographic that they've created and asks me the worst question in the world, which is, what do you think? Now, when somebody asks me that question, it's like, I feel like obligated to answer the question I was posed.
Of course.
And my first question is like, well, what do you want this to do? And what do you want other people to think when they see it? And I asked those kind of questions back and realized that although it was a prettily produced infographic, it didn't do the job or all of the jobs that this given individual would have liked it to have done. So how do we help maybe the small business owner that doesn't have a creative team but needs creative resource and is going to build maybe an outsourced creative team to answer a series of questions ahead of time before engaging with a creative professional? What sort of things might they want to think about first if we were to try and help them be more effective in that process?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. First of all, you have to think about where am I stuck, right? Where do I feel stuck right now? What are the oppressive forces that are coming against me accomplishing the objectives that I have for my life and my business? Because those sticking points, I think, are often symptomatic of deeper issues that have to be addressed before you go hiring people to solve a problem. You have to first ask, okay, why do I feel the need to go out and hire people? What is going on? Is it lack of revenue? Is it lack of awareness? Is it that I don't have a brand that I feel proud of? Is it that my website is not converting? Okay, great. These are specific problems. These are places I feel stuck, rather than just going out and hiring somebody and saying, please fix my business, right? Or, which again, nobody would do that, but that's kind of the sentiment.
Yeah, right. Nobody would do that, but everybody does it, right? Yeah.
Right. But you have to, again, and I sound like a broken record here. Not that people even know what a record is. Well, they do now. But you have to go back to defining the problem. What's the specific problem set that I'm trying to solve for here before you start thinking about hiring anybody for anything? And then you have to think, okay, and I love the way that Ray Dalio in the book Principles talks about this. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the book yet, but it's a great book. It is phenomenal. And it's funny because, several years ago, he put it out as a PDF, right? And I was sort of shouting from the rooftops about this PDF, and then they published it as a hardcover, and now it's, which is great because it's like, I can give it to people. It's phenomenal. But he talks about building the machine, right? Building the machine. So you have an outcome that you want to achieve, or you have a problem that you're trying to solve, and you have sort of the place where you are and all the identifiable problems that you encounter right now. And your job as a business owner or as a leader of a team or whatever is to build a machine that will help you solve the problems you're facing and achieve the outcome that you want to accomplish. So once you've defined those problems very specifically, your only job is to say, okay, what kind of machine do I need to build in order to be able to accomplish this objective? Which means, which moving pieces do I need to put in place? Do I need a strategist? Do I need a web designer? Do I need somebody to help me with SEO? Do I need somebody who can, help me with my sales strategy, because my go-to-market strategy for my product? Do I need, whatever that is? At that point, you can account for, okay, here's what I'm good at. I know what I bring to the table, but I know there are pieces of this machine that are not in place, and I need to hire for those pieces. Which again is a creative act. This is creativity in place, right? Is solving for building this machine. That is a creative act in and of itself. So I think, again, to sort of go back to where we started our conversation, creativity is problem solving. You have to start with very specifically defining the challenges, the problems that you're trying to solve, so that you make sure that you're actually moving towards something meaningful and contributive. You're not just building something because everybody else is building something. That's not useful to anyone.
So I guess listening to everything you're saying there is I'm hearing like two big questions that almost tie much of this stuff together. And I want to check this to see if we're on the same page. One is, what problem am I looking to solve, right? That is the big headline here, that in any given scenario, that before we do anything, we need to have clarity on the answer to that question.
Correct.
And then the second big question is, what does success look like?
Right.
A version of, how do I know when I've got there? Where do I get to a position where this thing is finished? Or as I've just written it there, is what does success look like? So yes, if you can provide either yourself or then in turn somebody else you're looking to help you on that mission with the answers to those two questions, then chances are what we might be able to do is to be a touch more creative.
That's exactly right. And the other thing I would add to that is that you need checkpoints in the midst of that process to make sure that you're still defining success properly. Because as you iterate, as you learn, that definition of success might change. You might realize, we're solving a different problem than we began solving, right? I had a great interview with Adam Stelzner, who is the head of the Mars rover, Jet Propulsion Laboratory Mars rover team, right? They landed the Curiosity rover on the surface of Mars. And they started out with the very simple question, like basically, how do we land the Curiosity rover on the surface of Mars? And their initial response was, well, we've always done it with parachutes and airbags, right? We just have parachutes that lower the whatever vehicle to the surface, and then airbags deploy and boom, 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 right? And it lands on the airbag, tumbles, and then it sort of corrects itself and is ready to go. The problem was that the Curiosity rover was a little more delicate, a little bit more difficult to land than previous vehicles, and so they had to ask the question, well, okay, so how do we land this delicate piece of equipment? They said, well, their first response was, well, bigger parachutes, better airbags, right? Because that's what we've done before. And they realized, well, that's actually not going to work. So they, as Adam described it, they had to stay in the dark room, the place of insecurity, the place of fear. Like we see this deadline. I mean, there's only a limited window in which you can launch a vehicle to Mars, right? Like the planets have to be aligned properly, the distance, so they see this deadline approaching and they're thinking, we don't have an idea. Like we've got to figure this out. And he said everything in them wanted to gravitate toward the first idea, just the first thing that came to mind. And he said, we couldn't do that. So they started thinking about, okay, how have people transported other delicate pieces of equipment? And they started thinking about like grand pianos, right? So you live in New York. If you have a grand piano on the 30th floor of an apartment building, and it's a delicate, 300-year-old piano that is irreplaceable, how are you going to move it? You're probably not going to have movers like throw it on their shoulder and haul it down the steps. It won't fit, right? It's just a delicate piece of equipment. And they said, well, we probably would use a crane, right? That's what we would do. We would use a crane to do it. And they said, well, what if we create a kind of sky crane? Is there a way that we could create a sky crane to lower the Curiosity rover? And so that's exactly what they ended up pursuing and inventing. They created this vehicle that would lower to the surface of the planet. It would fire rockets at a strategic point in time to hover in the air. And then a crane would lower the Curiosity rover to the surface of the planet. It's amazing. And then the tether would cut and the landing vehicle would fly off. And a remarkably innovative, creative solution. Unbelievable, right? But the only reason they got there is because they were willing to stay in the dark room, to continue pushing out into those uncomfortable places, to be brave enough to say, okay, we have a potentially passable solution, but it's not the right solution. It doesn't perfectly solve the problem that we're trying to solve. They had defined the problem very specifically, right? And so they were able to say, okay, this doesn't perfectly solve the problem that we're trying to solve, to push out into those uncomfortable areas where brilliant intuition resides until they got to the idea that actually would solve the problem. The way they did it was by looking at parallel problems that had been solved, which is one of the tactics we could talk about, right? Is asking how else have other people solved something similar to this? And that's how they eventually got to the solution that led to this, brilliant, innovative landing vehicle.
That's a great example. It makes me want to ask you is where are there other examples where perhaps you've seen brilliance of creativity in action, or people that inspire you because of their continued example of brilliant creative ideas?
Yeah. So I mean, I always go back. I think often, and this is sort of an overused example, but I'm going to use it anyway. It's overused for a reason. I go back to the late 1990s in Apple, right? And you think about when Steve Jobs came back to Apple, and they had, by the way, is the sun coming through the window just absolutely blaring at you right now on my face?
You look a little beautiful, man. It's like you're becoming godly in this moment. So we're going to run with it. We're going to run with it. We talked about the planets colliding. We're now talking about Steve Jobs. It's like, woo, radiating. So run with it.
Okay, good. Because I can adjust the shade. Sorry, the sun just came up over anyway. So, and I think about, at that point, I forget how many SKUs Apple had, but it was ridiculous. Like they basically were just, it was like popcorning new products all the time, a bunch of different variations of every product. And he came back and said, listen, in order to get to where we need to be, we have got to simplify our product line. And so they began slashing and burning products, right? Left and right, firing product teams, slashing and burning, cutting back to the bone, and basically drew a grid on the whiteboard and said, pro, consumer, desktop, laptop. These are the categories we're going to focus on, period. Everything else is done. Until we get these right, we're not going to do anything else. And that takes incredible bravery as a leader to do that, because that those products were making money. That there were people dependent on those products, right? To be able to say, I don't care, doesn't matter. This might be the death of us, but in order to get to where we need to go, we need to retreat. We need to cut back. We need to go back to the most simple form of execution that we can think of, so that we can begin to build in a way that's meaningful and contributive and consistent with what we want to be. And I think a lot of organizations and leaders, Phil, and I'm sure that you encounter this as well, there is so much residue that has built up over time. systems layer upon systems inside of organizations, right? And expectations layer upon expectations. I call these ghost rules. We have these ghost rules that exist in organizations about what is and what isn't possible, that are based solely upon something somebody heard once from somebody who's no longer at the organization, but they assume like this is forever and always going to be the truth, right? Because of this sort of invisible narrative that's guiding their behavior. And so systems layer upon systems, expectations upon expectations, and we feel stuck because of the unnecessary complexity of our organization. And so part of defining the problem to be solved, the reason it's an act of bravery is because it often means we're going to have to cut to the bone. We're going to have to trim back some of these things that we've been doing. They've been very good things. We have to trim back the good things so we can get to the great things, because brilliance happens often in the white space. It happens when we have the room that we need to be able to breathe, to intuit, to connect dots that have previously been disconnected. And the way that happens is by greatly simplifying our life and our expectations and our business to the point that we can focus on the critical few, so that we're not instead allowing our energy to wash out in the pursuit of the non-critical many. So that is something I often think about, is how can I simplify this? How can we simplify the problem? How can we eliminate unnecessary complexity, which only leads to dissonance within the organization, conflicting narratives, all of these things that over time prevent us from thinking creatively and contributively about the projects that we're trying to engage in.
Love that. Brilliance happens in the white space. And what we're doing is looking to be able to narrow that gaze, right? We're looking to be able to say clarity again on that problem we're looking to try and solve. Now, segue to a new direction. You wrote a book called Herding Tigers.
Yes. Which
would give me the indication that tigers are scary. Look, behind me in this video interview, like, I have a tiger on my
I love that. Tiger. I noticed that. Thank you.
Yeah, so did that especially just for you.
That's great.
But tigers are like scary things, right? I
right.
teach people how to lead salespeople sometimes, and I've referred to the analogy herding cats. You've taken this one stage further. And even with the title on your book, we're perhaps even announcing the fact that creative people are difficult to manage. Is this true? Is this a myth? What should I take from that?
Well, I think what I wanted to do is kind of reclaim that saying of leading creative people is like herding cats, because I've heard that over and over in my life as a former creative director of an organization, having led dozens of people in trying to accomplish projects and whatnot. I've always hated that phrase because I feel like what you're implying is that creative people have short attention spans, that they're only about the shiny new object, that if it's not exciting and thrilling, then they're not going to be interested. And you have to constantly try to manage, okay, here's what we're going to do. I mean, I find that to be a very demeaning way of thinking about, highly creative people. So I was actually just giving a talk one day, and the phrase came out of my mouth. I said, you've probably heard it's like herding cats. It's actually more like herding tigers. These are powerful, majestic creatures who are capable of amazing, beautiful feats one moment and capable of turning and ripping you to shreds if you don't lead them properly, right? And I think that's true. Listen, the highly talented creative people in your organization are the lifeblood of your organization. Your organization thrives on ideas. Without great ideas, your organization is not going to take new ground. You might protect the ground you've already taken for a while, but you're not going to take new ground. And if you don't take new ground, if you're not constantly looking at what's next, where are we going next, what new ground are we going to take, eventually your organization is going to wither up and die. There's simply too much competition in the marketplace. And so what I really wanted to try to communicate to people is, listen, you have to understand what it is that drives creative people, and you have to strategically and individually lead the people on your team if you want them to produce their best work every day. You can't just manage them like a group, like a herd, right? Like you have to strategically and individually lead them in order to get the best work out of them every day. And every person is different, by the way, and what they need from you is different. There are some commonalities, but you have to understand very specifically what is it that Phil needs from me as a manager in order to produce his best work. And that might be different from what Todd needs or what Jill needs or what whoever needs, right? But you have to understand the people on your team and know what makes them tick and know the right balance of stability and challenge that provides them with the proving ground, right, for their best work.
So strategically and individually, and as I hear that, and one of the things that I know lots of people continually struggle with is they don't necessarily have a creative team that sits in a corner of their office. They're not necessarily running a group full of creative people, but what they've done is they've built this network of people to deliver those services to them. And often they flit and float between that that network, looking for people to be very tactical on the delivery of jobs. What you're telling me here is that it may well be worth building long-term relationships and actually taking a very serious recruitment angle towards even those outsourced resources you bring towards your organization, so that you can strategically and individually give them more of the vision of what you're looking to be able to achieve, help them see the overview of the problems that you're looking to solve, and have them be on the same page with what success looks like, that you might get more done and have more consistency and continuity through what you're about.
Absolutely, no question. I mean, how much time do you want to spend trying to identify, train, and onboard new people for your team? I mean, that is such a time drain. It's a time suck for so many, especially entrepreneurs, right? But anybody who's working with outsourced talent, ask any consumer packaged goods company how often they want to have to switch agencies, right? And try to figure out, like, how do we have to onboard them. They have to get to know our brand. Like, this is a relationship, right? So when you're working with someone, when you're hiring someone, it is a relationship. You have to treat it like a relationship. And if you want to find talented people and you want to retain, especially if you want to retain talented people to work with you, then you have to understand what makes them tick, right? You have to, talented people have a lot of options, and if they feel over challenged, but there's no stability. So if you're constantly pushing them and challenging them with new work, and the terms of engagement are constantly shifting, and you're always changing your mind, and there's not any stability about your expectations, how you define problems, all of that, they're going to produce good work for a while because they're talented. They can do it on sheer talent alone. But eventually they're going to seek better horizons. Like, they're going to start looking for other work because they're not going to, they don't feel like you value them enough to give them a stable field on which to play. And similarly, if you provide them with a tremendous amount of stability, hey, here's exactly what I want. I'm going to tell you exactly what to do for me. Just produce this piece for me. Just do it this way. Like you said, I want you to make a video and I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to be in the video. And all you have to do is produce it. They'll do it for you and they'll stay with you for a while because you're paying them, but they're not going to want to work with you for long. And if you're inside of an organization that, those creatives feel stuck, they're not challenged. They don't feel like they're being pushed to bring their best to the table every day. So again, it comes back to the question, how much time do you want to spend identifying, hiring, and training people for your team? Because if you say, hey, I have an infinite amount of resources, great. Infinite amount of time and resources, great. Fine, burn through people, use them in the, whatever you want to do, that's fine. But that's not the case with most organizations I know have finite resources. Yeah. Most managers I know have finite resources. They don't want to spend their time trying to identify who's going to be working on the project. They want to be working on the project and providing value for their clients.
What I love here is the more and more mad truth and mad advice that you're dropping on, the more Messiah-like you're becoming in your appearance right now. So
let me rectify this.
I love it though, man. It's like it was literally lighting you up. The more gems that you were serving, it was like
kneel before me.
Tell me this then, as we start to bring this thing towards a close, is if before listening to this, I told myself I was not a creative person, what steps do I take to become more creative, find more acceptance towards the fact that I am? And then the reverse of which is, if I did see myself as a creative person, what do I do to use that creativity for more good and more productivity? So flip me both sides. Give me some action steps.
Yeah, so I think the answer is the same for both groups.
Okay.
I think it all comes back to rhythm and ritual in your life. We tend to treat ourselves like machines. So if we think we're not creative, we just see ourselves as functional, utilitarian. My job is just to crank out work like a machine, just to continue producing. Even if we see ourselves as creative, often we treat our creative process in a machine-like manner. I go to work, I produce value, I solve problems. That's what I do. I design, I write, whatever I do, right? But we very rarely step back to give our creative process the kind of care and attention that it needs in order to continue working properly. So for those who don't see themselves as creative, I encourage you to do a couple of things. Number one, make sure that you are taking time on a consistent basis to to write, to think, to get alone with your thoughts, to connect dots. I guarantee you that there are creative problems that you have to solve in your world, and the solutions to those problems are bubbling just beneath the surface, but often you're not stepping back to give yourself the time and the space to connect those dots. So whether that's journaling, there's a practice I do called morning pages. It was prescribed by Julia Cameron in the book The Artist's Way, which is basically writing 3 longhand pages in the morning of whatever's on your mind. And it's funny how often ideas come out of that time. Just taking time in the middle of your day to take a break from your work and to walk and to care for yourself, right? And to allow ideas to emerge. So I think that we have to be very careful not to treat ourselves like machines, whether we are what we consider to be inherently creative or not creative. Relationships. Are you getting with people on a consistent basis to challenge yourself, to talk about what's inspiring you, to talk about the problems you're solving, to spark ideas? Relationships are critically important, and we can't depend on relationships of obligation or convenience to get us there. We have to be seeking stimulating relationships. I mean, I know you and I are in a handful of groups together where that's what we do. We talk about, what are you experiencing? What's sparking you right now? What's helping you? That's really important. And you know what? That's not going to happen, Phil, if you and I just leave it to a chance encounter. That has to happen on purpose. Energy is another area where I encourage people to consider how they're structuring their life. We tend to think, if I physically have the time available, I can say yes to something. But the reality is, every commitment that you make in your life requires something of you, requires energy. And so, yes, we can physically cram as many things into the 9 or 10 hours a day to work as we have, right? We can cram those things in, but are we really bringing ourselves fully to what we're doing? And the answer is often no, because we're not giving ourselves the space, the margin to be able to approach our work in a meaningful and purposeful way. So are there commitments in your life, or if you're a manager, are there commitments that you're expecting your team to follow through on that are simply filling their life with unnecessary and useless activity? Are there meetings, recurring meetings that are really, does everybody need to be in that meeting? Do you need to copy all 67 people on your team on every single email that you send? Because every time you do that, you're communicating, I expect your attention, right? I want your attention on this. Or you're training them not to pay attention to anything you do, right? If you just send them meaningless stuff all the time. So we have to manage energy, stimuli. This is really important. What are you putting in your head? Are you challenging yourself? Are you communing with great minds, as Stephen Sample from USC called it? Are you reading things that push you, that cause you to think in new ways, that give you new kinds of stimulus that you can connect? Again, creativity is connecting dots, right? It's solving problems. So are you putting things into your head that are going to help you solve those problems and connect those dots? Are you putting yourself in situations where you're experiencing the world in new ways, where you're, maybe if you're an introvert, go to a dance club, right? If you're an extrovert, go to a museum and don't talk to anyone all day long. It's incredibly painful. It is, but it forces you to have to interact with the world in new ways, and it jogs a part of your creative brain, your dot connecting capability that isn't often jogged when we just stay in our ruts. And then finally, this is a really, really simple one, but with regard to hours, we often think about our time in terms of efficiency, but often when I'm speaking to a group, I'll say, like, how many of you think ideas are important to the future of your career, your business? Like, every hand goes up. Woo! Yeah, we're all excited about ideas. Great. How much time did you have on your calendar in the last week dedicated to doing nothing but generating ideas for your most important work? And it's crickets in the room. Nobody, no, maybe a couple people, right? Why do we say ideas are important, and yet we expect ideas to happen in the cracks and crevices of our life and our schedule? Do you have time on your calendar for doing nothing but generating ideas for your most important work? And you know what? That's going to feel remarkably inefficient. That's going to feel like I'm staring at my cubicle wall. That's what it's going to feel like, right? Sometimes when you're doing this. And yet, if you spend enough time doing it, you're going to get to that final 10, 15 minutes of that time, and you're going to have the spark of insight that's going to lead you to the solution that solves that critical problem. If something's important to you, it needs to be on your calendar. So do you have time on your calendar dedicated to deeply thinking about, and trying to come up with ideas for your most important work? So those are just a handful of things I would encourage all people. And by the way, for people who consider themselves creatives, they don't do these things. They expect their talent to carry them. The problem is, talent will only carry you so far. Eventually you will hit a wall. It's not your talent that will carry you across the line. It's your ritual. It's your practices. It's the discipline that you instill in your life that keeps you creatively viable, or as I like to call it, prolific, brilliant, and healthy all at the same time, right? So it's your practices that keep you in a place of viability.
Okay, love all of that. And summarizing it or wrapping it around is there's two things that recur through it. One is this creation of enough space in your life to be able to actually give yourself some time to think differently, and then creation of some different dynamics. So what you have is the ability to see things from a slightly different perspective, whether that is a new environment, a new person's point of view. And perhaps even this interview for some is an example of the ability for somebody to be able to spark some ideas, the ability to be able to plug into something they wouldn't have done otherwise, or to listen to a voice that they wouldn't have heard before. And I'm sure many people listening right now have heard my voice before, but Todd Henry might be new to them. So Todd, how do people find out more about you?
The best place to find me is at toddhenry.com. From there, you can get to my company, you can get to my podcast. I've been doing the Accidental Creative podcast for 13 years now, a couple episodes a week. So you can find that as well as anything else I do, all my books and everything.
And you've written so much stuff and produced so much content. If I'm new to Todd Henry, where should I start?
I would say, based on this conversation, I would start with either the Accidental Creative or Herding Tigers. The Accidental Creative is targeted at individuals who have to go to work and solve problems every day. How do you structure your life and your rhythms to help you be that person? Herding Tigers is targeted at people who have to manage those people who have to generate ideas every day. So how do you create an environment in which people are bringing their best work every day? And they're kind of companion books or sort of sister books. So the Accidental Creative is more for individuals and Herding Tigers is more for teams, but they cover many of the same kind of concepts.
Yeah, and as opposed to many is the Accidental Creative may have gone on to then need to be Herding Tigers later on in their career, somewhere in about the time gap between when you wrote one and when you wrote the other.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I got an email this morning actually from someone who said, I began with the Accidental Creative, it changed my life, I went through the other, and now I'm managing a team and I'd like for you to come help our team, right? And it's funny because you're exactly right. That's kind of the progression.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Todd, I could talk to you forever about this thing. I love the whole idea of creative thinking, and yeah, it's been a fun word to talk about today. And words are my thing. And a question that I roll everybody under the bus with that you didn't know anything about is, I say words are my thing. This is Words with Friends. I want to know, what's your favorite word and why?
I'm gonna tell you my favorite word, but it's not gonna be what you think it is.
Good.
So, my favorite word is passion. And when we think of passion, we often think of things I like, things that give me enjoyment, things that sort of fill me with ecstasy of some sort. But that's not really what the root of the word passion means. The root of the word passion in its original form comes from the word that means to suffer. So when you are passionate about something, it means, yeah, you might enjoy it. You have an obsession with it for sure, but it means that you're willing, if necessary, to suffer on behalf of an outcome because you care so much about the outcome. You're willing to endure the temporary discomfort in order to accomplish that outcome. So when I hear people talk about follow your passion, I'm like, great, that's wonderful. As long as you understand that passion means that you probably at some point will be called upon to suffer on behalf of that thing that you're pursuing. Meaning, I'm going to have to work harder. I'm going to have to stay longer. I'm going to have to endure a temporary setback in order to achieve an ultimate outcome. Great. Yes, follow your passion, but don't confuse that with I love every moment of my day, every day, because that's not realistic. People who are committed to pursuing a productive passion are people who recognize there is an outcome in my life that is more important to me than my temporary comfort. And I'm willing to throw myself into that, whatever may come. So that's why the word passion is, I think, my favorite, because it's helped me redefine the priorities in my life and redefine how I want to organize all of my pursuits.
I wonder how many people that brings a new meaning to being passionate with a lover.
Well, hey, listen, I think that really applies, right? Because listen, love is about bravery. It's about sacrifice. Love is about putting yourself out there at the risk of rejection. It's not suffering. It's the willingness to suffer, right? It's the willingness to put yourself in a place where you could be rejected, where you could fail. I am willing. Listen, if I'm not passionate, if I don't care about the outcome, I'm just going to hover close to the middle. I'm going to stay where it's comfortable. But when I care about something, I can't help but put myself in the fray. I can't help but put myself on the line. When I love someone with passion, I can't help but put myself in a place where there's potential rejection. I might not be sufficient. I might fail. I might disappoint them, right? But that's what it is. That's what it means to be passionate. And so that my understanding of that word has really changed a lot for me about the way that I approach life.
I love it. Todd, you've given so much value to everybody listening in today. It's been a pleasure to get to chat with you and hang with you and find out a little bit more. This is one of the things that I wanted to do because I wanted to spend more time with my friends, learning about the thing that they know more about than anything else in the world, or more than much of the things that they know about. So Todd, thank you for being part of Words with Friends today. It's been a delight to spend some time with you, and wish you all the continued success in your world.
Thank you. And same to you. And thanks for all the brilliant work that you do.
Thanks, brother.